Hi, good morning, and welcome to today's Take30. Today, we're going to be focused on a solution that we at Ironside have created, which we call AscentIQ. We're going to talk to you about how it can help you assess, plan, and accelerate your migration from legacy tools. All right, so just a note about Ironside for those who have not worked with us before. We see it as our mission to help our clients use data to make better decisions about their business, and we stay focused on this mission in everything we do. So I'll be presenting today. My name is Scott Masage. I'm Ironside's Practice Director for BI. I've been in the BI space for about 22 years now, and I've been with Ironside for the last 9 years. All right, in terms of an agenda, first we're going to talk about why organizations would migrate from, the existing BI tool they have to another tool. After that, we'll introduce AscentIQ. We will talk about some typical AscentIQ scenarios, and spoiler, they don't all pertain to migration, but that is certainly the primary use case. We'll talk about something that we call the AscentIQ Assessment, which is a process that typically front ends a migration to a different tool. We'll also talk about the AscentIQ Cookbook, and I'll do a demonstration of that. And then we'll talk a bit about how you can engage us and learn more about AscentIQ. Okay, so why migrate? Why do organizations migrate their BI tools? So first, it's often the case that there are some feature gaps between what your users want to be doing and what your legacy BI tool can do, right? Typically, these tools have been implemented 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and in some cases they haven't, either the functionality hasn't kept pace with other tools. Some of these feature gaps are real, but some of them are also perceived by your user community, but either way, they're important, right? They matter. These gaps or perceived gaps matter to your user community. There are cases where the tool you have is sometimes perceived as being too difficult for users to learn, and thus these users are leveraging different methods to get their answers from data. It could be Excel, it could be a tool they downloaded. And certainly buying power over the last, say, 10 years has shifted from being centralized in IT around buying tools to the various business functions. So sometimes a business function will just buy the tool they want and begin to use it. Once that happens, these solutions can gain traction, and then it becomes very difficult for organizations to support multiple vendor solutions. And ultimately, there's a drive to get down to a single tool. So you've got this pressure to go from the multiple tools to the chosen one, right, the enterprise standard. License and support costs are also often a factor. With traditional BI solutions, there are incremental increases in subscription and support costs, with the perception of little or no incremental value each time you're paying that annual bill. Also, there are new cloud-based and cloud-native options that are subscription-based, and in some cases, impression-based, and perhaps these modes are of consumption are better aligned with how your organization leverages BI. And certainly since the introduction of Cloud BI, it's largely been about visualizations and Mode 2 analytics, right? Everyone, if you will, everyone chased Tableau and the functionality present in that tool. But we've been in conversations with many of the leading vendors. We can tell you that enterprise capabilities are coming to those cloud-based and cloud-native tools. Infrastructure costs and challenges. So typically, sizing an infrastructure for BI is a compromise. So you can't easily scale as demand dictates, so you wind up underserving or overbuilding and dealing with the related costs. This situation is somewhat improved by cloud-based solutions. However, you typically need to estimate demand to size things the right way from the beginning. In the case of cloud-native serverless BI tools, something like Amazon QuickSight, this really isn't a concern anymore. And then the final reason that organizations migrate their BI tools has to do with organizational strategy and change. So sometimes new leadership demands new tools. I've seen that many times in my career. In some organizations, there's a mandate for distributed versus centralized analytics being more of a legacy approach, and that drives the desire for different tools. In other cases, you have organizational changes like acquisitions, and that can sometimes mean that enterprise BI solutions instantly become viewed by the acquiring firm as technical debt, and there's a drive begins to move them to a new platform. So just an overview of some of the many reasons why organizations would want to migrate. So when considering a migration, there are a number of challenges that tend to keep clients up at night. Some of these challenges are, what's it going to take to migrate? What do I need to understand? Which content is critical for the organization and which of it can be left behind? What features of the current BI tool are important to my user community, and how complex is my content? Because complexity really drives effort and cost. How compatible is my current BI content with other tools? How aligned are my analytics use cases with other tools? What's this going to cost? How long is it going to take? And lastly, but also very important, can I get this done soon enough to avoid paying another support bill for my existing platform, right? That's a big driver. People just want to move on and not have to pay for both, if you will. And certainly AscentIQ can help you solve for these challenges. So what is AscentIQ? So we'd like to say that it's a set of assets, methods, and utilities to accelerate the customer's BI migration journey. And really, the basis of it is to capture information about your environment, bring it, kind of capture it, distill it down, and organize it in a way that we can then make it easier to understand. And we like to use the word accelerate when we talk about AscentIQ. And so what do we mean when we say that? We mean that AscentIQ can address those tasks within a migration that are tedious, labor-intensive, and challenging. And we do that to reduce project duration and costs and help you ultimately move the ball down the field, right? The idea that you can hit the easy button and have your platform migrate from one tool to another via automation, that's just not realistic, right? So again, we focus on how can we accelerate this and help you move the ball down the field. Okay, so when we consider those tasks, what are they? So the first is understanding your overall environment, right? So assessing the amount, the usage, the complexity and compatibility of content to be migrated. The second is kind of a drill down, and that is understanding the content itself at the technical level. So the technical details of reports and metadata identified for migration such that they can be recreated in the new platform. And then there's the actual work of doing the migration. Now, there are a couple different ways to do this. There's always the lift and shift where you're kind of replicate, the content you've selected to move to the new tool, you are simply replicating it as it is with no change. There are a lot of cases where you would want to approach this by reimagining the existing content in the context of the capabilities of the new tool, right? Just because all your old reporting was lists and tabular data and crosstabs, it doesn't mean it has to be that way, especially if the new tool has greater capabilities for visualization, right? And again, that's reimagining. Often what we see is a blending of the two approaches, all right? That is very typical. But understand that AscentIQ helps you accelerate all these tasks. So let's talk a bit about scenarios. The most common, we start here with the most common scenario for the use of the AscentIQ solution, and that is migrations. So certainly we're cognizant as the starting point, we can accelerate migrations to other tools, including things like Power BI, Tableau, Amazon QuickSight, but also really any other tool, right? Because it's about developing understanding of what you have. Impact analysis is another scenario. We had a client that sought to migrate some of their data sources to the cloud, we needed to understand which specific reports would be impacted by this change. Based on the content we had extracted and cataloged, we're in a position to help them accelerate that process and deliver that understanding to them. Risk mitigation is another scenario. We had a different client where the institutional knowledge about their Cognos reports was exiting the company. And given that they had never documented these reports, they needed to understand how the reports were constructed so they could maintain them in the future. And they didn't want to start from zero, right? Because sometimes that maintenance needs to happen very rapidly in the face of changing business conditions. Lastly, but also an important part of any migration is rationalization assessments, and certainly AscentIQ can help here as well. As I said before, we're bringing together audit and content detail, and by doing so, we can help a client understand information about what content is being leveraged and by whom, as well as the use of features that might be of concern for that customer, including things like reports that are really masquerading as ETL jobs, right? Cognos is a powerful tool. It gives me the ability to kind of leap over the wall of, I can't access the database. For instance, I can't access the database directly with a query tool, but I can create this giant list report inside of Cognos that just pulls all the data out. I take it, I put it in my kind of spread mart on the side, and not only have I kind of walked around security, I've got this store of data that's separate, and really that's a task that's better suited for ETL or data wrangling tools. Also, perhaps the use of hard-coded SQL is problematic for an organization, right? When developers do that or users author reports that way, it means that changes made to the metadata tier don't flow down, and reports can break. Okay, so the first, if you will, kind of artifact of AscentIQ is based on what we call the AscentIQ Assessment, and that's, again, where we're looking at your environment, understanding details about the architecture, pulling down your audit information, pulling down your information from your content store. And really the dashboard is that key artifact that brings it all together. So the dashboard provides you an overview of your legacy implementation, and it summarizes the key metrics that we think are critically important for any migration, those being usage amount, complexity, and compatibility. With this dashboard, you have the ability to filter by type and characteristic, and really this is what we leverage to drive the rationalization process and understand the effort and cost of the migration. Okay, so we'll do a little deep dive here into an example. So this is a closer look at what we call the dashboard summary page. We see our three key metrics here: usage, complexity, and compatibility. In usage, we see details about how the user community is leveraging the legacy environment, including run versus view, right? Again, saved output. What are the average user sessions over time, the different types of components leveraged, and what type of report outputs are generated. Moving on to complexity, this shows the count of total reports, and then some details on complexity scoring. We have weighed each of the components we can identify, which I think is we're up to 130 different components of a Cognos report. We give them a complexity weighting, and we score each report accordingly. In this example, we can see that this report population has layout component references in 32% of the reports. Details like this are important to understand because they will drive how we approach the migration. In the case of layout component references, we'd want to understand this better to see how we can solve this in whatever the 2B tool is, right? Maybe the 2B tool doesn't have that capability, and we need to think about how we solve for that. So moving on to compatibility, here's where we understand how well the features leveraged in this report population compared to what's available in whatever the tool is. In this case, it's an example of QuickSight. and where we might have gaps. So let us move ahead to usage, right? So this is we have a dashboard for each of these. Usage, we have a deeper dive here so we can see more information about user behavior. We see the sessions, the run requests, the view requests, the edit requests, and then, what has the usage been over time, log on sessions, when is the system busy, when is it not? So, here we're going a bit beyond what we absolutely need for migrations, but it's giving you a sense of what's going on in your environment all in one place, right? Because we think that it's critical to understand as you look forward to migration. All right, so here is our dashboard on complexity. So here we are seeing it's a histogram that's showing you the distribution of complexity in this environment. We are seeing the total number of reports and then object counts, a bit of an inventory about which reports have which content. So we're seeing here that in this universe of data, or universe of content, we've got 86 burst reports. 86 burst reports, but then 617 reports that have 8,003 HTML items, so JavaScript embedded into them. Layout component references, right? Heavily used in this environment. So again, this is giving you a sense of what's going on there and what the complexity is, and that really drives the migration effort and how you should be thinking about it. Down at the bottom, we've got actually the details about the inventory of features inside of reports. So on the very left, you've got a drill to the actual report ID, and that actually will take you to the cookbook, which we'll show you in a bit. But again, this gives you a sense of the complexity weighting of each report, and then groupings of what is driving that complexity. Okay, so moving on to the cookbook. We like to call the cookbook a technical specification guide for legacy Cognos reports. And really, we call it the cookbook because it reveals the ingredients of existing reports without you having to go through the time-consuming discovery analysis that is required to understand what's going on in a report, and allows you to do it without having deep Cognos skills. We actually talked to a client a little bit ago who had actually done this assessment process of their reports, and they told us that to understand the composition of 150 reports, it took them 4 months to do, right? This is something that we can do in days with this process. And really, the cookbook is also helpful because it accelerates the time it takes to recreate the same reports in the 2BBI tool, right? You've got a map, you've got this cookbook, you know what the ingredients are. It's easier then to rebuild in the new tool. So bottom line here, the cookbook significantly offers you have to invest significantly less effort to assess and recreate reports, both assess in your existing tool and then recreate in the new tool. So let's just take a manual assessment scenario. So what you're seeing here is an example of a report I put together in about 5 or 10 minutes. Very simple report based on some sample data. And assuming I know what I'm doing in Cognos, it takes a lot of, there's a lot of clicking around to understand everything you need. And that goes from opening the report to looking at the queries, to looking at the prompts, understanding what's driving the visualizations and their properties. In this case, this very simple report, it took me 65 clicks, right? So even after I do all this clicking around, I need to write things down, right, in a manual assessment scenario. So how much time does that take? And now if you kind of move forward and think about more realistic examples, some reports that are much more complex, you're talking about hundreds, maybe even thousands of clicks to understand what's going on in a report. And when you take a look at some of our clients and the amount of reports they have, 33,000 reports, 17,000 reports, 200,000 Cognos reports, think about all the time you're going to spend trying to understand all that content. And again, our process can deliver that information in a significantly less amount of time. All right, so what I'm going to do now is do a quick demo. So right now what we're looking at is one of our standard audit reports, which we run in client environments to help them understand what's going on in their environment. So if we look at this one, right, so we've got, we're looking at, this is running against audit data. We've got 3 singletons across the top, some combo reports. We go down here, we've got some area charts and a pie chart. This is actually the cookbook that has been run against that. So what we're seeing here is the item ID of that report from the content store, the name of the item, what the type of the item is, and its complexity score. Remember, we're capturing complexity as we go here. We see the path and what the metadata packages that this is written against. We see that it has one prompt page called prompt page 1. It's got 4 pages, 4 report pages. The first one's called summary, the second one's called concurrency analysis. This interesting one we were looking at here is called concurrency analysis. So we can actually click on this and then get right down to what's going on there. So again, we see 3 singletons across the top. Each of them is aligned to a query. We see that information here. We see that there's a combo chart here. If we jump down and we look at the pie chart that's on this report page, we can see that the request type is used for the pie slices, and the total request count is the measure and defines the size of each slice. So if we click on that query that's related to it, now we can actually see the expressions. You know, some of these are just straight drag and drops. Other ones are using functions. So if we look at this one here, right, we're using the maximum function. We're counting. We're seeing an average here, a count here, and this is all this query called all requests is actually based on a union between the run report query and the edit query. Right. So lots of detail about reports that's going to help you. I'll go back to the summary here. That's going to help you build out the report in the new tool. You know, for example, here we've got 12 different queries, right? So I can go to the query directly from here, and that's often the way we go about rebuilding reports in the new tool, where we start with the data foundation first and build up from there. Okay. Okay. So I wanted to spend a moment to talk about an AscentIQ case study. So we worked with a Fortune 500 financial services firm earlier this year. We thought this is a good example to show. So this client was actually moving from Cognos to MicroStrategy, and they engaged us because they had some initial inklings of what the budgetary estimate for their migration should be. However, they wanted to get tighter on that number, right, and come up with a more realistic number based on data. So they came to us and asked us to provide them with some experienced Cognos consultants to assess and document the complexity of 700 of their Cognos legacy reports. So when we thought about it from we wanted to kind of answer their request directly and give them an option of doing it manually as they asked us to. And we said, look, it's probably 11 weeks, $100,000 worth of work. But we also suggested to them that we had AscentIQ and we could accelerate that process. So with AscentIQ, and certainly they chose that option because it was faster and lower cost. When we leveraged AscentIQ, we delivered results to them in days as opposed to 11 weeks. We gave them complexity scoring, both in a client context, so within the universe of their reports, how complex was a single report, but also versus benchmarks, right? Also in the context of all the other reports that we have assessed for other clients, right? They got a full inventory of reporting components and functionality usage, so they could drive their approach, architect their approach to the migration and set expectations for the user community. And lastly, their engagement budget was approved due to a more accurate fact-based estimate. Okay, so with all of that, how might you get started? So certainly, we'd be happy to talk to you about an AscentIQ migration assessment. Again, we see that as, if you're doing a migration, we see that as step one. Even if you're just looking to understand your environment, the usage of it, the content, the complexity, a migration assessment is appropriate. So certainly, we've got this AscentIQ@ironsidegroup.com email address. You can just send us an email there, and we're happy to talk to you more about it. The other thing I'd like to offer is an AscentIQ Cookbook trial, right? So we demonstrated the Cookbook. We are happy to run a sampling of your reports through the process and review the output with you, and we'll do so at no cost, just so you get a sense of what the tool can do. All right, so thank you very much for the discussion today, and I guess we will pause now for any questions. Okay.
Scott, I don't see any questions from the group, but is there anything else that you think the group should learn?
I mean, certainly, certainly head on over to the Ironside site, and we've got more detail about AscentIQ. If you're interested in learning more about the migration assessment, we can send you some additional detail on that as well. All right. If there are no further questions, then I thank you all for joining, and I wish you a great rest of the day.
I did just get a last-minute question, so I think we have another minute or two. The question is, what platforms can you do a migration assessment for?
So today that platform is, we would focus on Cognos. We have talked internally about expanding it to other platforms, but right now the focus is Cognos.
Thanks.
But certainly, if we want to have a conversation about other platforms, we're happy to do that.
Thanks. I think that wraps it up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, all, and have a great day.